Good day. It is Thursday, April 13th, I think. So, back to The Magician's Nephew, and we are in chapter 9, The Founding of Narnia. A little commentary, real quick here. I'm sitting here in my little home in Helena, Alabama, and I was just hearing like some grinding noise. Like something was being torn up or eaten up, and I thought it might have been one of the dogs out on the porch chewing on a stick or a bone or something. Uh, and so before I started reading, I thought, well, I'll go check out what this is because I can actually still hear the noise. And what it is right over the ridge from where we live here. Uh, they're putting in a neighborhood, and they're grinding away at trees, rock, clay, and that's what that noise is. Is that they're grinding away to put up more houses, taking away houses to animals, right? And so the reason I thought that was pertinent to today is because this chapter is called The Founding of Narnia. And we were just hearing in chapter 8 the beautiful sound of creation and of new life. And just to juxtapose that against what's going on right over the ridge here is the destruction of life. But then people could say, well, wait a minute, but it's going to be building homes for people for more life to flourish and blah, 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 blah. That's possibly a good point, but let's get on with reading. Do better, be better. The lion was pacing to and fro about that empty land and singing his new song. It was softer and more lilting than the song by which he had called up the stars and the sun. A gentle, rippling music. Rippling music. Makes me imagine a pond and having it, a fish jump and then seeing the ripples of where that fish had jumped. And as he walked and sang, the valley grew green with grass. It spread out from the lion like a pool. Just like the rings, the ripple effect. It ran up the sides of the little hills like a wave. In a few minutes, it was creeping up the lower slopes of the distant mountains, making that young world every moment softer. The light wind could now be heard ruffling the grass. Soon there were other things besides grass. The higher slopes grew dark with heather. Patches of rougher and more bristling green appeared in the valley. Diggory did not know what they were until one began coming up quite close to him. It was a little spiky thing that threw out dozens of arms and covered these arms with green and grew larger at the rate of about an inch every 2 seconds. There were dozens of these things all round him. When they were nearly as tall as himself, he saw what they were. Trees! He exclaimed. Oh, the nuisance of it, as Polly said afterward, was that you weren't left in peace to watch it all. Just as Diggory said, trees! He had to jump because Uncle Andrew had sidled up to him again and was just going to pick his pocket. It wouldn't have done Uncle Andrew much good if he had succeeded, for he was aiming at the right hand pocket because he still thought the green rings were homeward bound. But of course, Diggory didn't want to lose either. He didn't want to lose either of the type of the rings. "Stop!" cried the witch. "Stand back! No! Further back! If anyone goes within 10 paces of either of these children, I will knock out his brains!" She was poised in her hand. She was poising in her hand the iron bar that she had torn off the lamp post, ready to throw it. Somehow no one doubted that she would be a very good shot. I wonder why. She didn't seem very athletic. She might be strong, but I can't see her practicing much of anything. "So," she said, "you would steal back to your own world with the boy and leave me here?" Uncle Andrew's temper at last got the better of his fears. "Yes, ma'am, I would. Most undoubtedly I would. I should be perfectly in my rights. I have been most shamefully, most abominably treated. I have done my best to show you such civilities as were in my power. And what has been my reward? You have robbed. I must repeat the word, robbed, a highly respectable jeweler. You have insisted on my entertaining you to an exceedingly expensive, not to say ostentatious, lunch, though I was obliged to pawn my watch and chain in order to do so. And let me tell you, ma'am, that none of our family have been in the habit of frequenting pawn shops except my cousin Edward, and he was in the yeomanry. Yeomanry. You have to look that one up. Yeomanry. Yeomanry. During that indigestible meal, I'm feeling the worst of it at this very moment. Your behavior and conversation attracted the unfavorable attention of everyone present. I feel I have been publicly disgraced. I shall never be able to show my face at that restaurant again. You have assaulted the police. You have stolen. Oh, stow it, Governor. Do stow it, said the cabbie. Watching and listening this thing at present. Not talking. So basically, the cabbie's saying, would you just shut up? We want to witness all of this amazing stuff happening because you know what? We may never witness something as awesome as this again. So just shut up. There was certainly plenty to watch and to listen to, other than, the Queen and Uncle Andrew blabbing on. The tree which Diggory had noticed was now a full-grown beech. Beech, Beech, not like a beach that you go swimming. A beech tree, whose branches swayed gently above his head. Wow, that was fast. That grew fast. They stood on cool, green grass, sprinkled with daisies and buttercups. A little way off, along the riverbank, willows were growing. You gotta love willows, especially the weeping ones. Not like weeping because like weeping, like they're reaching down. On the other side, tangles of flowering currant. Look that word up too. Figure out what a currant is. Currant. Lilac, wild rose, and rhododendron closed them in. The horse was tearing up delicious mouthfuls of new grass. All this time, the lion's song and his stately prowl to and fro, or back and forth, was going on. What was rather alarming was that each turn he came a little nearer. Polly was finding the song more and more interesting because she thought she was beginning to see the connection between the music and the things that were happening. When a line of dark firs sprang up on a ridge about 100 yards away, she felt that they were connected with a series of deep, prolonged notes which the lion had sung a second before. And when he burst into a rapid series of lighter notes, she was not surprised to see primroses suddenly appearing in every direction. Thus, with an unspeakable thrill, she felt quite certain that all the things were coming, as she said, out of the lion's head. What comes out of your head? Thoughts, ideas, products of your imagination. Interesting. Let's move on. When you listened to his song, you heard the things he was making up. When you looked around you, you saw them. Almost like immediately. It was spontaneous. This was so exciting that she had no time to be afraid. But Diggory and the cabbie could not help feeling a bit nervous as each turn of the lion's walk brought him nearer. So the lion was getting nearer and nearer to them. And remember, they're thinking about a lion in their own world, and they're dangerous in the world that Diggory and the cabbie are from. And remember, the cabbie has his dear horse Strawberry with him, so he doesn't want any harm to come to Strawberry. Let's see what happens. As for Uncle Andrew, his teeth were chattering because he's nervous, right? But his knees were shaking so that he could not run away. So his mouth is chattering and his knees are knocking together, so he can't even get his mind together to say, hey, where am I supposed to be right now? Or where can I escape to? Suddenly, the witch stepped boldly out toward the lion. It was coming on, always singing, with a slow, heavy pace. It was only 12 yards away. She raised her arm and flung the iron bar straight at its head. Nobody, least of all Jadis, could have missed at that range. The bar struck the lion fair between the eyes. It glanced off and fell with a thud in the grass. The lion came on. Now that means it continued on, right? Its walk was neither slow nor faster than before. You could not tell whether it even knew it had been hit. Though its soft pads made no noise, you could feel the earth shake beneath their weight. So whenever one of the paws would hit the ground, you could almost, it reverberated. It kind of vibrated all the way along, and like an earthquake or something. The witch shrieked and ran. In a few moments, she was out of sight among the trees. Uncle Andrew turned to do likewise, tripping over a root, and fell flat on his face in a little brook that ran down to join the river. The children could not move. They were not even quite sure they wanted to. The lion paid no attention to them. Its huge red mouth was open, but open in song, not in a snarl. It passed by them so close that they could have touched its mane. I'm thinking of my dog Bruno because he's kind of fluffy up top and he has like a mane. They were terribly afraid it would turn and look at them, yet in some queer way they wished it would. But for all the notice it took of them, they might just as well have been invisible and unsmellable. When it had passed them and gone a few paces further, it turned, passed them again, and continued its march eastward. Uncle Andrew, coughing and spluttering, picked himself up. Now, Diggory, he says, we've got to get that woman, and the brute of a lion is gone. Give me your hand and put on your wearing at once. Keep off, said Diggory, backing away from him. Keep clear of him, Polly. Come over here beside me. Now, I warn you, Uncle Andrew, don't come one step nearer. We'll just vanish. Do what you're told this minute, sir, said Uncle Andrew. You're an extremely disobedient, ill-behaved little boy. No fear, said Diggory. We want to stay and see what happens. I thought you wanted to know about other worlds. Don't you like it now that you're here? Like it? Exclaimed Uncle Andrew. Just look at the state I'm in. And it was my best coat and waistcoat, too. He certainly was a dreadful sight by now. For, of course, the more dressed up you were to begin with, the worse you look after you've crawled out of a smashed hansom cab and fallen into a muddy brook. I'm not saying, he added, that this is not a most interesting place. If I were a younger man, now, perhaps I could get some lively young fellow to come here first. One of those big game hunters. Something might be made of this country. The climate is delightful. I never felt such air. I believe it would be done me good if circumstances had been more favorable. If only we'd had a gun. Guns be blowed, said the cabby. I think I'll go and see if I give Strawberry a rub down. That horse has more sense than some airman's has, I could mention. So basically the cabbie was just saying, my horse has more sense than some humans that he knows, or that he could mention, and he's probably looking at Uncle Andrew while he said it. He walked back to Strawberry and began making the hissing noises that grooms make. Do you still think that lion could be killed by a gun? Asked Diggory. He didn't mind the iron bar much. With all her faults, said Uncle Andrew, that's a plucky gal, my boy. It was a spirited thing to do. He rubbed his hands and cracked his knuckles, as if he were once more forgetting how the witch frightened him whenever she was really around. It was a wicked thing to do, said Polly. What harm had he done her? Hello! What's that? Said Diggory. He had darted forward to examine something only a few yards away. I say, Polly, he called back. Do come look! Uncle Andrew came with her, not because he wanted to see, but because he wanted to keep close to the children. There might be a chance of stealing their rings. But when he saw what Diggory was looking at, even he began to take an interest. It was a perfect little model of a lamppost, about 3 feet high, but lengthening. Oh, well, this isn't 3 feet. This is like 3 inches. But it was lengthening and thickening in proportion as they watched it. In fact, growing. just as the trees had grown. It's alive too. It's lit, said Diggory. And so it was, though of course the brightness of the sun made the little flame in the lantern hard to see unless your shadow fell on it. Remarkable, most remarkable, muttered Uncle Andrew. Even I never dreamed of magic like this. Oh, we're in a world where everything, even a lamppost, comes to life and grows. Oh, now I wonder what sort of seed a lamppost grows from. Uncle Andrew's not very, well, he's a little bit this, right? Don't you see? Said Diggory. This is where the bar fell. The bar she tore off the lamppost at home. It sank into the ground, and now it's coming up as a young lamppost. But not so very young now. It was as tall as Diggory while he had said this. That's stupendous, said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands harder than ever. They laughed at my magic. That fool of a sister of mine thinks I'm a lunatic. I wonder what they'll say now. I have discovered a world where everything is bursting with life and growth. Columbus! Now they talk about Columbus, but what was America to this? The commercial possibilities of this country are unbounded. Bring a few old bits of scrap iron here, burying them, and up they come as brand new railway engines, battleships, anything you please. Oh, and they'll cost nothing, and I can sell them at full price in England. I shall be a millionaire. And then the climate. I feel years younger already. I can run it as a health resort. A good sanatorium here might be worth 20,000 a year. Of course, I shall have to let a few people into the secret. The first thing is to get that brute, get him shot. You're just like the witch, said Polly. All you think of is killing things. And then as regards oneself, Uncle Andrew continued in a happy dream, there's no knowing how long I might live if I settled here, and that's a big consideration when a fellow has turned 60. I shouldn't be surprised if I never grow a day older in this country. Stupendous! The land of youth! Oh, cried Diggory, the land of youth? Do you think it really is? For of course he remembered what Aunt Letty had said to the lady who brought the grapes, and that sweet hope rushed back upon him. Uncle Andrew, he said, do you think there's anything here that would cure Mother? What are you talking about? Said Uncle Andrew. This isn't a chemist's shop. But as I was saying, you don't care twopence about her, said Diggory savagely. I thought you might. Well, after all, she's your sister as well as my mother. Well, no matter. I'm jolly well going to ask the lion himself if he can help me. And he turned and walked briskly away. Polly waited for a moment and then went after him. Here! Stop! Come back! The boy's gone mad, said Uncle Andrew. He followed the children at a cautious distance behind, for he didn't want to get too far away from the green rings or too near the lion. In a few minutes, Diggory came to the edge of the wood, and there he stopped. The lion was singing still. But now the song had once more changed. It was more like what we would call a tune, but it was also far wilder. It made you want to run and jump and climb. It made you want to shout. It made you want to rush at other people and either hug them or fight them. It made Diggory hot and red in the face. It had some effect on Uncle Andrew, for Diggory could hear him saying, "A spirited gal, sir. It's a pity about her temper, but a dem fine woman all the same. A dem fine woman." So he's thinking about Queen Jadis. But what the song did to the two humans was nothing compared with what it was doing to the country. Can you imagine a stretch of grassy land bubbling like water in a pot? For that is really the best description of what was happening. In all directions, it was swelling into humps. They were of very different sizes, some no bigger than molehills, some as big as wheelbarrows, two the size of cottages, and the humps moved and swelled till they burst, and the crumbled earth poured out of them. And from each hump there came out an animal. The moles came out just as you might see a mole come out in England. The dogs came out, barking, the moment their heads were free, and struggling as you've seen them do when they are getting through a narrow hole in a hedge. The stags were the queerest to watch, for of course the antlers came up a long time before the rest of them. So at first Diggory thought they were trees. The frogs, who all came up near the river, went straight into it with a plop, plop, and a loud croaking. I don't even know if that's a croaking, but I tried my best. The panthers, leopards, and things of that sort sat down at once to wash the loose earth off of their hind quarters, and then stood up against the trees to sharpen their front claws. You know how cats, when they go to the scratching pole or something, showers of birds came out of the trees. Isn't that a nice word? Showers. So the birds are just kind of like, woo, woo. Butterflies fluttered. Bees got to work on the flowers as if they hadn't a second to lose. But the greatest moment of all was when the biggest hump broke like a small earthquake, and out came the sloping back, the large, wise head, and the four baggy trousered legs of what? What do you think it is? Of an elephant. And now you could hardly hear the song of the lion. There was so much cawing and cooing, crowing, braying, neighing, baying, barking, lowing, bleating, and trumpeting. Oh, let me show you some pictures. Okay, so that looks like a squirrel and a mole, and there's the big old elephant plopping out of the ground, and I think that's a tiger, right? I think. I can't really see what that is. Oh, that's the antelope, I think. Oh my. But though Diggory could no longer hear the lion, he could see it. It was so big and so bright that he could not take his eyes off it. The other animals did not appear to be afraid of it. Indeed, at that very moment, Diggory heard the sound of hoofs from behind. A second later, the old cab horse trotted past him and joined the other beasts. The air had apparently suited him as well as it had suited Uncle Andrew. He no longer looked like the poor old slave he had been in London. He was picking up his feet and holding his head erect. And now, for the first time, the lion was quite silent. He was going to and fro among the animals, and every now and then he would go up to two of them, always two at a time, and touch their nose with his. He would touch two beavers among all the beavers, two leopards among all the leopards, one stag and one deer among all the deer, and leave the rest. Some sorts of animals he passed over altogether, but the pairs which he had touched instantly left their own kinds and followed him. At last he stood still, and all the creatures whom he had touched came and stood in a wide circle around him. The others whom he had not touched began to wander away. Their noises faded gradually into the distance. The chosen beasts who remained were now utterly silent, all with their eyes fixed intently upon the lion. The cat-like ones gave an occasional twitch of the tail, but otherwise all were still. For the first time that day, there was complete silence, except for the noise of running water. Diggory's heart beat wildly. He knew something very solemn was going to happen, or was going to be done. He had not forgotten about his mother, but he knew jolly well that, even for her, he couldn't interrupt a thing like this. This must have been like a ritual or a special gathering. The lion, whose eyes never blinked, stared at the animals as hard as if he was going to burn them up with his mere stare. And gradually, a change came over them. The smaller ones, the rabbits, moles, and such like, grew a good deal larger. The very big ones, you noticed it most with the elephants, grew a little smaller. Many animals sat up on their hind legs. Most put their heads on one side as if they were trying very hard to understand. The lion opened his mouth, but no sound came from it. He was breathing out a long, warm breath. It seemed to sway all the beasts as the wind sways a line of trees. Far overhead, from beyond the veil of blue sky which hid them, the stars sang again. A pure, cold, difficult music. Then there came a swift flash, like fire. But it burned nobody, either from the sky or from the lion itself. And every drop of blood tingled in the children's bodies, and the deepest, wildest voice they had ever heard was saying, Narnia, 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 awake. Love, Think. Speak. Be walking, trees. Be talking, beasts. Be divine, waters. And that's how the chapter ends. So you can see how Aslan is in the center, and these are the chosen animals. I have another story I'm going to read to you real quick. It's called, well, it's from a book called Holy Moments. And it dawned on me today that, this has to do a lot about what we're reading with The Magician's Nephew. So bear with me. Let me just read the prologue to you. Once upon a time, there was a monastery deep in the forest. It was full of monks. They were full of joy. That joy was contagious, and people traveled far and wide to visit. Okay, so the reason I'm mentioning this story is because it kind of reminds me of what we were reading about in The Magician's Nephew. The spirit, the voice, the singing that the lion is doing uh, is kind of like what this is talking about. That joy was contagious, and people traveled from far and wide to visit. Okay, so you know how like Uncle Andrew is trying to say, "Hey, what's happening here? This would be a great sanatorium." That's a place where people go to get renewed, refreshed, or whatever. Okay, so this was happening at the monastery. One day, a young man asked the abbot why people came to the monastery. Well, most people come looking for answers to their questions, the old monk explained. The young man was curious what type of questions people asked. The abbot continued, "Well, they come seeking answers to the same questions all men and women ponder. What should I do with my life? Am I wasting my one short life? Where do I find meaning? And how do I get the most out of life?" The young man had traveled a long distance to visit the monastery, and as he walked away, the old monk wondered what question the young man's heart was wrestling with. Time passed, and life at the monastery changed. It was ever so gradual at first. A couple of the monks became cranky. They had slowly closed their hearts to God and each other. Other monks became jealous. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking of Uncle Andrew and Queen Jadis when we're talking about some of these people. A younger monk was much more handsome and popular with the visitors. Some of the monks began to argue about things of no consequence, and the poison of gossip crept into the monastery. Visitors noticed that little by little, life at the monastery was deteriorating. They perceived the monks were losing their joy. They noticed the monks were not as kind to each other, and over time they observed the monks growing impatient with their visitors. The seasons came and went, and fewer visitors came to the monastery until one day the people stopped coming altogether. The abbot rose each morning, an hour before his brother monks, and sat in the chapel asking God to give him the wisdom necessary to revitalize the monastery. But Another summer came and went, and in the depths of the coldest winter ever, a profound sadness gripped the old abbot's heart. He thought he tried everything. For hundreds of years, people had come here longing for a glimpse of God, and the monastery had thrived. What had he done wrong? He was wrapped with guilt and shame. The gap between his faith and his life had widened, and he didn't know how to close it. On the first day of spring, the abbot announced at breakfast that he was leaving the monastery. Well, not leaving it, but he was leaving it to make a journey. "Where are you going?" Brother Killian asked. "I will visit the hermit in the mountains to seek his counsel on our situation, the situation here at the monastery." There was a wise hermit who lived in the mountains 30 miles to the north. People traveled into the mountains to seek his wisdom. The hermit and the abbot had been childhood friends, but this the other monks did not know. So it was like a secret. "When will you return?" Brother Owen asked. 3 days," the abbot replied. "Who is in charge while you are gone?" Brother Fabian asked. I will let you decide that amongst yourself," the abbot said. His words were still hanging in the air when the arguing broke out. There was a time when the other monks would have been concerned about him making such a journey, but they were no longer concerned for each other, only themselves. There was a time when one of the others would have offered to accompany him, but those days were gone. The abbot slipped quietly out of the monastery and began his journey toward the mountains. Walking through the forest, in those first miles of his journey, he observed his heart was anxious. But with each passing mile, he became aware of a rising hope in his heart. As dusk was falling, he came upon a small clearing in the foothills and decided to sleep there for the night. The old monk gathered some wood, made a fire, ate a little bread and cheese, and settled down to sleep. He was startled in the night by the howling of wolves and the screeching of wild parrots. He noticed his heart was racing, but he was not afraid. He did not fear death. He feared the torture of a life without meaning. Late the following morning, he arrived at the hermit's cave. The hermit was standing just outside the cave. As the abbot approached, he said joyfully, "I've been waiting for you!" And the two men embraced like long-lost brothers. I have something to ask you," the abbot said. I know, but that can wait," the hermit replied. "First, I want to show you something." The abbot was possessed by an impatience that surprised him, but he followed his friend. The two men walked peacefully through the trees, and after about 15 minutes, a fine lake was before them. It was breathtaking. The hermit sat on a large boulder at the side of the lake, and the abbot sat on a smaller boulder next to him. They sat in silence for over an hour, and the abbot felt a deep peace rising in his soul. The lake was clear and still. The surface was like glass, and the sun was reflecting perfectly on the water like a golden disk. The abbot was mesmerized. When the sun had reached its pinnacle, okay, so at its highest point, the hermit began to speak. Ah, a still pond reflects the sun perfectly. God is the sun. Ah, you are the lake. When your soul is still and clear, you reflect the truth, beauty, and goodness of God to everyone you encounter. As the day goes on, the wind will pick up, the lake will be full of ripples, and you will barely be able to see the sun's reflection in the water. So basically, what he's saying is sometimes our lives get so busy that we forget to be that reflection of all the goodness in creation, of which God is a source if you believe in a God. But if you don't even believe in a God, you can think about Aslan, or the lion in The Magician's Nephew, and the goodness and the creation that's coming out of all of nature and around us. After a few minutes, the two men walked back through the cypress trees to the cave. As they sat drinking tea, the abbot described what had happened at the monastery over the past several years. The hermit listened closely, and when the abbot had finished, asked a few clarifying questions. "What have you come to ask?" was the hermit's last question. "What wisdom do you have for us? How do we rejuvenate the monastery? How can we best serve the people who come to visit?" the abbot asked. Well, that's actually 3 questions, the hermit said with a smile, so radiant that the abbot had to kind of look away. He was a little bit ashamed, like, "Yeah, I know you said 1 question, but I gave you 3. I will answer your 3 questions with 1 answer," the hermit continued. "Go back and tell the brothers, the Messiah is among you." And with that, the hermit closed his eyes and slipped into a deep meditation. So, if some of you don't know what the word Messiah means, it means the promised one, the anointed one, the one that comes to make a difference, that has secrets, that has magic. So when we think about the lion singing the song of creation in Narnia, it's the same sort of thing here. That's what the Messiah does. The Messiah is among us? What can that possibly mean? The abbot mumbled to himself. But as he walked slowly down the mountain, the full meaning of the hermit's words took root deep in his soul. Back at the monastery, the monks were growing concerned. The abbot had said he would be gone 3 days, and he had already been gone 5 days. The next evening, there was still no sign of him. They began discussing what fate might have befallen him. The following morning, Brother Fabian callously suggested he was not coming back either, because he had died in the mountains, or because he had abandoned them for some other life. Just as the sun was setting that afternoon, Brother Bartholomew saw a figure approaching the monastery and cried out, "We have a visitor!" It was not a visitor. It was the abbot. He whispered softly to Bartholomew, "Oh, hey, gather everyone in the chapel." The abbot was radiant as he sat before the whole community on a small wooden stool. He looked 10 years younger. The monks could not remember a time when he seemed so fully alive. He told the other monks of his journey and shared with him the message he had received. "This is what I asked the hermit. What wisdom do you have for us? How do we rejuvenate the monastery? How can we best serve the people who come to visit?" The hermit replied, "That's 3 questions. I will answer your 3 questions with one answer. Go back and tell the brothers, the Messiah is among you." The monks were astonished and gasped. From that moment on, they looked at each other differently. They thought of each other differently, and they began to treat each other differently. The monks wondered day and night who the Messiah among them was. Was it Adrian? Bartholomew? Killian? Owen? Fabian? Or was it the abbot himself? And as the brothers wondered, they began to treat each other with renewed kindness and a profound respect. As time passed, the abbot noticed little things. There was a new spirit of cooperation. The brothers praised and encouraged each other. Compassion and forgiveness returned to their hearts, and they were kind to each other. These little things, these holy moments, breathed new life into the community. The monks were flourishing. You gotta love that word. The monastery was, here it comes, flourishing. Even the flowers in the field and the cows in the barn seemed happier. I know you're going to start. You were thinking I was going to say flourishing, didn't you? And then one day, it happened. The visitors returned. At first, it was just 1 or 2 visitors, like it had been in the past. But then they brought their friends, and their friends brought their friends. Those that came to visit the monastery noticed that the monks were overflowing with joy. They perceived the monks had a profound reverence for each other, and they observed the monks' unquenchable patience with their visitors. In a few short years, the monastery had been transformed from the brink of collapse and was thriving like never before. A village sprang up around the monastery, and the monastery became the center of life for the people of the village. The monks loved the people loved the monks, and they all lived together in harmony and happiness. One Saturday afternoon, the old abbot was sitting on a bench in the courtyard, looking gratefully towards the mountains, when a woman approached. So he was probably thinking about his friend, the hermit that lived up there and had given him those wise words. So this is when a woman approached. Sitting down next to him, she asked, "What happened here?" The old monk beamed his warm, knowing smile and asked, "What do you mean?" "This place is completely transformed," the woman explained. No, the abbot disagreed gently. "The place is exactly the same. It's the monks who have changed." "How did it happen?" she asked. "Well, we started living as if the Messiah were among us," the abbot replied. The woman pondered that for a moment and then began to weep. The old monk put his arm around her to comfort her. She told him about her life and troubles. The woman shared with him the question that was tormenting her soul, the question that had urged her to visit the monastery, and they sat in silence for a long time. So this is curious. Remember how when the monk first went to visit the hermit and they sat at the pool for a really, really long time? Our society tells us, well, of late, recently, that things should be done fast, 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 fast. Hurry up, hurry up. What's taking you so long? But in this story, we're being told that just the opposite is necessary. We need to slow down and think. And they sat in silence for a long time. What advice do you have for me? The woman asked, breaking the silence. The two sat quietly for another long moment before the old man spoke, and then he said, treat every person you ever meet like the second coming of Jesus in disguise. So, you don't have to believe in Jesus. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in any religion. Think of everyone that you meet as the potential promised person that you're supposed to meet. Someone that holds secrets, because everybody holds secrets, right? I know I do. And sometimes it's because of shame or um, worry about people judging you or something. Or shyness, right? You could be shy. Treat everyone as if they are a valuable source of information for you. Or treat them as if you might hold answers for them. It's not always about you. Well, in a way, it is about you. If you're holding answers for somebody else, then you're meant for them and they're meant for you. And oh, that's why the abbot said, treat everyone as if they were the second coming of a promised individual, of an important individual. Be better, do better. Thank you for your time today. Enjoy.